It was the dead of night as we raced down the highway. It felt like we were the only car on the road as miles would pass before we saw another pair of headlights. I didn't know how we would make it in time. Marcy just kept breathing heavily, trying to subdue the pain. Even with me flooring it, we were still 45 minutes from the nearest town. I was so concerned for my wife's well-being, I neglected to notice the approaching car that had drifted across the center divider. I swerved to try and avoid it, and watched helplessly as we went over the edge of the paved roadway and down towards the chasm below. For a moment, we were weightless, her hair suspended in midair as if she was floating underwater. Reality returned the moment the car struck the side of the cliff. We tumbled end over end, our bodies held in place by the seatbelts as everything else was flung about. It was like being trapped on a roller coaster with no way off. Finally, the car rolled to a stop. I took a moment to get my bearings and see if Marcy was all right. I crawled out of the mangled wreck and pulled her free. We both were banged up, but luckily no bones were broken. Marcy looked up to me with tears in her eyes and said that it was coming. With no options, I was forced to make do in the wilderness as my wife went into labor. In that moment, I couldn't help but feel like Joseph and Mary giving birth to Jesus in a manger. Finally, after what felt like hours, our son emerged. I held him in my arms and beheld the sight of his new life thrust into the world. His skin was pale, sickly green, his eyes a bright gold. He had teeth that were pointy and razor sharp. This was not my son. This was an abomination. A monster. This was not made in the image of the Creator, but rather a hell spawned from Lucifer himself. A slight against God that must not be allowed to live. I removed my pocket knife to cut the umbilical cord, but instead I slit the creature's throat. Marcy, half-conscious, asked to hold her baby. As I held my wife in my arms, I did the only humane thing I could. I snapped her neck. She was the vessel that ushered in this demon. She was the means by which God's will for me was revealed. The car had been leaking gas since the crash. It was a miracle no explosion had happened. I dragged her body back to the wreck and placed the baby in her arms. I climbed in beside her and lit a match.